Thank you. And good morning, everyone. Good to see the familiar faces on and some new faces. Hi. Welcome to the first event of Inspiring Conversations, Innovation in Education. So we hope to inspire a lively conversation today and make it more of a conversation than a presentation. I think I'm speaking on behalf of Bridget in that regard. My name is Jennifer Bartholomew. I'm a financial advisor with UBS Financial Services here in Pittsburgh. And I've served on the board for CISPAC since, I think if Bridget started in 2015, I would be
2016, I think.
Oh, 16? Was it 16?
I think
So
yeah.
I am one of the elders on the board. So I don't know how much you know about CISPAC. CISPAC was founded to help school districts in southwestern Pennsylvania fulfill the promise that we provide to each student in our region to ensure that they have the resources to excel in school and, more importantly, in life. Working within our school walls and beyond, CISPAC can help build a community of support among the district leaders, families, and local businesses and communities. CISPAC's educational support program is effective, data-driven, and customizable. Their work exists to help you tackle issues you face every day in your schools, and kudos to academia the past 2 years. I can only imagine normal life because I have 2 boys, so I can't imagine having to go through what you've done the past 2 years. We know the work you do is extremely challenging without a pandemic running around, and CISPAC can help you maximize resources and impact measurable change for your district's most pressing needs. I chose to volunteer CISPAC back in 2016 as I feel a lot of kids fall through the cracks, and I think it's imperative to have those conversations at the beginning before things really get off the tracks, and give those children someone. They may not necessarily have someone at home that's supporting their educational aspirations or goals. And I find that I know for my kids, a lot of times just having a mentor, whether it be a coach or someone in school, has made all the difference in that piece of their life. So I know for these children who don't go home and necessarily have a parent and or food at home, to have someone there that's supporting them, not only academically, but on a personal level, can make all the difference for them. And I think this is vital work, and it's a great bridge for the community to come in and help. And I think it's great for the mentors to realize what's going on in our own backyard and to be there to help these kids. With that being said, I'll introduce Bridget Clement. She is the executive director. She has been with CISPAC since 2015, and she was the one that recruited me. Her passion for making schools a place where students thrive has guided CISPAC through the pandemic and into a season of growth and expansion. Bridget, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's so wonderful to have you here this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
You have been one of our stellar board members, and I'm so glad that every time we call you, you're like, I'll be there.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to open us up today with a little bit of just a few comments, because right now we are living through a collective trauma. And what that is really is it's just a traumatic event shared by a group of people. But just as trauma impacts an individual, a large-scale traumatic event can cause a massive shift in the way people in a culture behave, feel, work together, and raise their children. The pandemic, though, is still not over. We are still actively living through the trauma of this event. We can't effectively process it until it's over. So we keep moving, and we wonder why we're not as productive as we used to be, or maybe we're more anxious than we've ever been before. Like the Great Depression, I think the COVID pandemic will shape the human experience for generations to come. And if that weren't enough, we are constantly bombarded by bad news within our communities and from around the world. I know I feel like this increased violence, and there's increased violence and chaos all around. And sometimes it's overwhelming. I just think, can you imagine the impact of the Great Depression if it had been televised and on social media the way the pandemic has? I think we would be an entirely different country and different people had that been the case. And while the pandemic impacts have been felt in every aspect of our lives, I would argue that our schools have felt its impact the most acutely. The work of educating children is one of the most important vocations we have. How we prepare our young people for the world directly impacts our country, our state, and our local communities. When we fail to engage our young people, we don't just fail them, we fail ourselves. We hold back the very communities we hope to build. I know for myself, navigating this time has been difficult in ways I couldn't have predicted. But out of those challenges, there have been great opportunities to learn and grow as an individual. The same can be said for our communities and our systems. They've undergone incredible trauma and have still continued to function. In some cases, we're even getting better in some ways, right? Now we accept electronic signatures for example, or yes, it is possible to do work remotely without business coming to a screeching halt. So our systems do have the capacity to grow and change. But too often we only focus on the very negative aspects of the moment of our moment in time. We don't look at the positive things that occurred during the day, but we'll dutifully list all of the things that went wrong. We're so fixated on the negative that it can make it incredibly difficult to see any progress, positive or otherwise. It's because of all of these and maybe about 1,000 other reasons that we developed the Inspiring Conversation series, Innovations in Education. This series is meant to do three things: provide an opportunity to stop and look at the positive interventions that are working, to explore the future of education and how we can best shape it, and to provide a space for school leadership to have conversations about these topics. And I know that there's lots of organizations that provide some networking opportunity for superintendents, but I do feel like now it's especially needed more than ever because this has been a really difficult time. So today we're going to kick off this series with Dr. Tom Ralston, and he will be discussing with us the power of community collaborations. These sessions are meant to be conversations. As we've said, we welcome, just join in. Since we're small, we can just talk and that'll be great. And that way we can just make sure, we're really taking a time to do a deep dive into some of these important topics. And this is what Communities in Schools does. We investigate what's happening in our communities and our schools, and we devise strategies to help solve problems and build capacity. We support students and their families, and we hope to bring long-term positive systemic change to our public schools. And today's topic is particularly interesting. There is incredible power when organizations collaborate, but when our schools and the community that they serve work together, it's unstoppable. We find greater levels of engagement for both students and families. Greater supports are available and they're well coordinated so that students get what they need when they need it. But most importantly, there's a greater trust. And trust is essential if we want to reach our students and help them find a positive and fruitful path for their future. Dr. Ralston, thank you again for being here today. I'm just going to give you a little intro. He has been working in the K-12 public education sector for more than 30 years, beginning as a middle school science teacher. Dr. Ralston has served as a principal throughout Western Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and was formerly the superintendent of Avonworth School District in Allegheny County. As director of the Superintendents Forum, Ralston leads the organization in its mission to support its members in delivering on the promise of a quality education. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Ralston. And if we could just start with a little overview of the work that you do at Pitt and with the Forum.
Well, thanks, Bridget. Welcome to everybody that's joining us. It's my pleasure to be with you today. And so much of what you said is really at the top of mind for me. And I know a lot of school leaders out there. So I just recently transitioned from being a school superintendent at Avonworth, as you mentioned, and now I'm working at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm a professor in the School of Education there and teaching classes in the undergrad, master's, and doc programs. But in addition to that, I have another role that's really, really important for the region, I believe. And that's my role as the director of the Forum for Western Pennsylvania School Superintendents. And that organization has been around for about 25 years. It encompasses nearly 50 superintendents in our region, covering multiple counties around southwestern Pennsylvania. The mission of our organization is advocacy for children and youth. It's a pretty simple one, right? But it gathers together some high-level leaders who have a history of really advocating for children and viewing the decisions they make in their school districts through that lens. So we gather together twice a year formally to consider thoughts and ideas, innovations around education. It's an opportunity for folks. It's sort of like a think tank, right? We get the high-level leaders together. They consider ideas, they collaborate, and out of that comes some really great things. So I was a member of the forum prior to accepting the directorship, and it's a real source of pride that I have the opportunity to be involved with this great group.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we're so glad to have you here. And as I said, being communities and schools, we are very interested in the topic of community and school partnerships. Mm-hmm. What have you seen over this trying time that has impacted, or what changes have you seen in school and community partnerships?
Yeah, I think that, it's just, it's been a really great story, right? I think that needs to be told. And I know folks are really, really tired of the pandemic. And as it seems to have loosened its grip a bit, everyone would feel really good about just maybe moving past it, right? But I think there are some really important lessons that we can take from it that we need to consider for the future, right? And those are both success stories and also stories of sadness and trauma that we need to reflect on as well, because they both can be motivators for us to make the change that we really, really need in our education systems moving forward. So I'll start with the successes, right? I think we've probably seen the most significant shift in learning, right? In how we grow professional development for our teachers and how we deliver learning experiences for students than we've seen in probably 100 years, right? And obviously it was a forced change because of the pandemic and the different modes of learning that had to take place so we could continue with it, right? But it was significant. And I think there are a lot of tools now that teachers have that they didn't have prior to the pandemic. And they've discovered a lot of things that they can do differently. And schools have found ways also to operate, as you mentioned, that they hadn't considered previously as well. But we would be remiss also if we didn't talk about how this experience of the pandemic really accentuated the inequities that exist out there for many schools and many students that are in challenged communities, right? And when I say that, I want to emphasize that means really, we can paint that with a broad brush to consider students that are in urban settings, students that are in rural settings, students of color, students in low socioeconomic situations, students with mental health needs. They're all across the board. Those inequities, I think, and those challenges have been accentuated. So, this going back to the successes, what we've seen schools do miraculously is we've fed people, right? That's, if you take a look at each school can really tell a great story about the number of families that they continue to feed during this trying time. But beyond that, it was expanding Wi-Fi access. It was getting devices in kids' hands, ensuring that they were receiving the supports they need from mental health professionals. Many schools used funding from the federal government and state government to increase the amount of social services that they had within their schools. So that outreach was very, very important. So, I think it really, again, it's been a real great story that we need to tell. And like any great story, it has the ups and downs that are within it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm wondering too if you know, I found when you say schools are feeding, the schools were feeding people, that it became the bane of our existence as well, meeting basic needs for the kids that were cut off from school. It was devastating, right? To
Mhm.
have those lower income students not have access to that school building. It was also interesting to see the schools pull together in a lot of ways to mobilize their feeding programs, or just opening. I mean, they did so much in such little time, but I wonder too, I know there's lots of reasons why we close the schools, right? I get it. But those schools really are important hubs for our community and for the people who can get to and from them. So I'm wondering if you've noticed any shift in that feeling since the pandemic, since it's not just a building that we house kids and educate kids, it became more of a centerpiece to the community than it has been in a really long time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that schools have always been the hub of the community. Maybe folks didn't quite recognize it. Some probably did, but maybe there were others that didn't quite recognize that. But again, it was something that really played out over the course of the pandemic. Whether it was the gathering place, where the place where students go so their parents can go to work, right? That was obviously disrupted, and it led to a lot of consternation in a lot of school communities, right, where parents were struggling. I've got to go to work. What do I do with my child? I'm trying to work at home because my job is shifted to a virtual environment, but my children are here, and I have young children. They're trying to learn online. They really need my support. How do I do that and balance work at the same time? There were all these challenges that everybody was experiencing. And the thing that really jumped out to me when I thought about that was that schools can't do it alone and parents can't do it alone. That's right. It really jumped out to me that neither one is able. I mean, schools were not equipped to have this support system in place that do all the things that we were asking during the pandemic. And parents, quite honestly, they were for the first time seeing their education of the education of their children in a way that they'd never seen it before, right? So they were being exposed to the challenges. I can't tell you how many emails that I received from parents who said, "Oh my gosh, I really now realize what a difficult job teachers have." So I think that in some ways there was a respect level that was raised for teachers during the experience, but also, facing that challenge. So, I think that provides an opportunity for us to think about how we can take this experience and move what has traditionally happened in schools from a relationship that best can be involved or can be explained by described by involvement, and move it to one of engagement. And when I say that, what I mean is that involvement oftentimes for schools was schools operating in the way they would traditionally operate and ask parents to provide supports when they were needed, right? Provide, come in for your child's parent-teacher conference, come in and work the book fair, participate in open houses and things like that, the canned food drive. So basically when the school needs something, asking, when parents can actually come in and be involved. We have an opportunity right now, and I think it's not just an opportunity, it's I think a shift, right? I think parents now, because of what's happened in the pandemic, many communities, they're saying like, we want education to be different. Our expectation now is different in some cases that has been a challenge to what's being taught in classrooms. We're seeing that playing out. We're seeing the challenges it's at the school board level with parents angry about content and pushing back on certain things. So to me, the only way forward is really rethinking about how we engage, how we build these communities of trust and relationships so we can move forward together. Because, simply saying we're going to go back to the way it was is really, I don't believe it's an option.
I'm glad you said that, because that's my biggest fear, has been since this started. I tend to be a glass half full kind of person. So I was like, well, this is going to be awful, but what are all the opportunities that are going to come out of this crisis? And are we going to be able to sustain them? Are we just going to go back? And there was a lot of time that I spent during this pandemic going, no, I can't go back. We just can't go back. But I do see in the work that we do, and because I'm a mother of 3 kids, 2 in the public school system, 1 in college. So I've been there, and I see things beginning to fall back the way they were. And remote learning is not, while it's still there, essentially all we did with it was take away snow days now. Right. And we're also in some districts using it as a form of suspension now. So we'll make all the kids be asynchronous that are pains in our rear end, and we'll push them out that way. And we know it's asynchronous and they're not going to do it anyway. Right. So how do we take these tools? Like you said, the teachers have new tools now, the schools have new tools. Largely, I know this is probably, you're discussing the technology that has been really introduced in a way that we've never seen before, right? Kids literally have devices in their hands. How do we make this, or what does that look like? What could it look like, I guess, if we were to truly embrace that technology and those tools and dream a different world for education?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll try to address it in a number of different fashions. And I know we have another superintendent on the call here, Jesse Wallace, who I'll encourage also to weigh in if he would like. But I think, Bridget, that when I reflect on my experience as a school leader and as a learner, there are many, many things that we were doing prior to the pandemic that were good, right? And so, I think when I think of learning and children learning and being engaged in these great communities that exist in schools, it's about joy, right? I think that's what, for me as a school leader, what I was I was missing, right, the most as I was going through the pandemic was like, I need to get back to the joy of learning. When we were online and I was, viewing what was happening in classrooms, teachers were working extremely hard to try, and they changed. I watched what we were doing change and get better over time from the inception of the pandemic, when our district was only down for 2 days, and then we started in with some form of learning. That changed a lot from the time the pandemic started until we got into really, the second year of the pandemic. And so kudos to our educators out there for all their efforts. But still, there was an element of it, even though they got better as we went along, that I was like, man, for me, I was thinking about all these wonderful projects and things that we were able to do when we were in person that we weren't quite able. Our teachers did a great job adapting them in many cases, but they still weren't the great experiences that I remember when we were in person. And so, I was like, for my own son actually was a middle schooler during the pandemic. And I had said to many people, I spent the bulk of my career in middle school. I was a middle school teacher, and I was the middle school principal for a number of years, including at Avonworth. I worked really, really hard with our staff to incorporate these rich projects that were just wonderful, experiences for our children. And my own son had his experience compromised because of the pandemic and wasn't able to engage in those things. So I think there's a real important conversation has to take place. And the only way we do this, and we do it well, is if we bring our communities together, right? We've got to bring our communities together. And so when I say that, when I say our communities, who am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about, obviously, all of our teachers and our students and our parents, but I'm also talking about the community that's connected or should be connected to the school. So I'm talking about our residents, right, of communities, our business owners, our faith community, our health community that supports our schools, the arts, the libraries, all those different organizations that can partner and really make the experience for students more, rich and robust. So our providers, so our preschool providers, our after-school providers, who are those people? The mentors that our students look to, our athletic programs, bringing all those folks together and starting these conversations. And I really think, for me, it's a great opportunity for us to get back and say, what is the purpose of school? Mm-hmm. What's it really about, right? I think about that, and I think back on my time as an educator, especially educational leader, and I honestly say, wow, we were kind of on this treadmill, doing school, but we never were really talking about what is the purpose of school? What are we here for? What is school supposed to be providing to students and families? And those answers are probably very varied, right, and very different across the board to a lot of different people. But I think if we get in and we engage and we start having these conversations, they can really reveal a lot to us about the things that we do that make sense, that we want to continue doing, and the things that really don't make sense, or the things we've discovered during the pandemic that we found we can do better through some tool or some technology, or some activity that has now been revealed.
Yeah, I can't agree more that now is the time for school districts to bring the community at large, parents and other stakeholders, to the table to discuss what we do, right? What is this? What can we do here that would be different? Because we do assessments when we do our work, and every single school that I engage with asks me the exact same question. They're all struggling with it, which is, how do we engage parents? Because our parents don't value education, and neither do the students. No one values this. To which I say, well, if no one values it, do we have the right product?
Yeah, and I would say that I think that simply saying that parents don't value education, or families don't value it, or students don't value it, I think there's deeper questions that we have to ask, right? And I was involved. I had the good fortune of being involved in a research project with the Brookings Institute, Center for Universal Education, during the pandemic. The research project wasn't designed to take place during the pandemic, but it just so happens, as this project was launched, the pandemic hit. And it was really interesting, there were a lot of things that rose to the surface in that project. One of the things that we discussed, and was a commonality across districts, is that we can oftentimes mislabel that parents don't care with there's a lot of other things happening, right? And one of those things can be a bad experience that the parent may have had in school, right? And maybe it's that same school that their child is attending, right? So maybe they had really negative experiences themselves that now are providing a barrier for them to engage with the school. There's a lack of trust. Maybe they felt trauma from their experience, and that's keeping them from walking in the door. How responsive are our schools to the cultural differences? For instance, we've seen a large influx of immigrants into our region. So there are sometimes language barriers, cultural misunderstandings that we might have about how just the traditions of that culture and how they interact. And so that's a barrier, right? And one of the other barriers that really rose to the surface through this research was the simple fact that educators, teachers, and administrators really are not provided with the training and professional development to really know how to overcome a lot of the things I just mentioned, right? How do we build these systems that move us from involvement to engagement? How do you do that, right? And I think about it as just a simple thing, right? Like when I reflect on parent-teacher conferences that we would conduct, that's an intimidating environment for a parent to walk into. They walk into a room, oftentimes there may be more than one teacher that's sitting there. They're sitting across the table, right? There's usually, I'm from my experience, not a whole lot of time, right? So what is shared?
And they're always running late.
Yep. So they're sharing simply the academics, right? This is what your child's doing right now. Here's their level of achievement. Here's the homework assignments they're missing. There's really not much opportunity for them to talk about the relationship, how important the relationship it is between, the child and their classmates or their teacher. So those are some things that really, for me, rose to the surface from being involved in this research project. Jesse, I'll ask you to weigh in here. Do you have anything to add? We have another expert on the call here, so I'll call upon you.
Not a problem. At the beginning of the conversation, Bridget hit on tools. And I think that a lot of people took the online atmosphere as not a tool, but as a platform in order to teach children. Mm-hmm. Likewise, moving forward, we've all received ESSER's money, and we're all getting this updated technology to prepare, prevent, and possibly be in a position that if we have any type of event like this in the future, we are ready to go remote at the drop of a hat. But like anything else, it's a tool, and that's all it is. Even in the classroom, it should be used as a tool. The way kids learn is through differentiation. You talk about value of education. They have to value what the teacher is giving them in the form of education. What application does that have today? You can't tell a student that, you need to know this because when you graduate, you're going to need it for your college career, you're going to need it for your military career, or you're going to need it for your work career. That's not good enough. You need to know what the application is today and how you can grow that base of knowledge moving forward to where you can use it wherever it takes you. But that's where the value of education comes in. And the reason a lot of parents have been disconnected from the school system is for the exact same reasons you guys just mentioned. They've had bad experiences. Mm-hmm. They're in the same ballpark as their kids. And they're like, you know what? That's the same way they did it when I was there. You don't need to pay attention to that. And that's where we have to do a better job. And the research that Dr. Ralston was talking about, I just finished reading a book on attendance, and the exact same mirror image there with very, very significant results are saying that, the reason children aren't coming to school is because their parents didn't come to school because they had a bad experience. And we've got to do a better job of bridging those gaps. And you look at education now, not only are we educating students every day, educators have been called upon now when you look at school violence, and that's just one aspect. Mm-hmm. We're now defenders of the fort. We're installing bullet resistant glass. We're installing security cameras. The social media bullying issue is astronomical with students today. And you look at our primary students, especially, I'm looking at the kindergartners of 2020 and 2021. I'll go deeper than that. I'll go to the kindergartners, first graders, and second graders of those 2 years. I've literally been out of school for 2 years. Their learning platform isn't what a normal student's platform is going to be. Right. And we have to reach them and then catch them up. And it's for every student. I don't care what your background is. I don't care what your religion is. The approach that we're taking here, we're going to educate you. You walk in the doors of Laurel Hahn School District, we're going to give you a world-class education. We're going to make it relevant. We're going to give you applicability to today. We're going to have the latest techniques. Our teachers are going to give you projects to work together as a group, not just as an individual. We need more of those types of experiences. And I think as we move forward, there's one other point I wanted to make. The purpose of school, that was mentioned earlier. You're exactly right. The purpose of school needs to be that we're going to give you skills and tools that you want and that are also applicable to today and tomorrow. And you can't do it the same way it's always been done. We have to do a better job of expanding ourselves and evolving ourselves to reach every student at every level. No where they come from, no matter what color they are. I don't care if you're gay or straight. You walk in here, we're going to give you an education. And that's what we're about. And everybody's welcome. And it has to be equity across the board. If you have one individual or one group of students who feel like they are disenfranchised and they're not being involved and valued at the most basic level of walking in the front door of schools, then you failed. And that cannot happen. And your staff, I don't care if it's a cafeteria worker, a teacher, your front office staff, everybody has to be on board with that. And it's a culture change. In some places, that's the way we've always done it. Well, that's no longer good enough, nor can it be accepted. So that's kind of my soapbox speech on how I feel about it. But you're right, we have to do a better job than what we've done in the past. And for those disenfranchised families who feel like, that's the way they did it when I was there. It failed me. It's going to fail you. So why even try? That's the work we have at hand.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And you hit on something that's really, the two of you talked about something that I have a hard time agreeing in my mind. And I understand, believe me, I hear both sides of the argument and I hear it loud and clear. This is no more difficult. I mean, every decision that a superintendent has to make is fraught with all kinds of issues and difficulty. But I think the safety issue is probably one of the deepest ones we have. How do we balance? And I don't know, I don't expect either of you to have an answer to this, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are. How do you balance the need to have a joyful building and experience and be installing bulletproof glass and bringing armed police officers in? I know you didn't say that, but I'm saying in general, this is the real challenge that I see. That how do we strike that balance between joy and safety?
Well, I mean,
go ahead, Jesse.
Go ahead, Dr. Ralston, you go first.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's a great question, and there are, having been involved in school construction, I think that I think school construction right now is at a really exciting time too, right? So if you take a look at what's happening in architecture design in schools, we're moving away from the traditional cinder block type of design that, quite honestly, really resembles prisons, right? Mm-hmm. That they're standard size rooms, they're cinder block, they're very institutional in their feel, right? So I know there are a lot of school districts, including Avonworth, that have really moved in a different direction to create an environment in their school that very much feels like it's the students, right? It's the students. They have a lot of voice in what it looks like. The spaces are designed so that they really fit the learning, not the other way it used to be, which was you had to fit the learning to the space, right? So if we can flip that and think about fitting the space to the learning, then we're going to have environments that are very engaging and rich. So, when I think about school security and engagement, right, I think about, and it all wraps in with what Jesse said, this creating this sense of belonging for the students, the staff, the community, where the school is really theirs, right? We noticed this really interesting thing happen in our school district when we started moving in that direction. And it's not easy, right? You're breaking people's sense of what they're used to. I remember having the discussion with my business manager when we were starting to paint different hallways, different colors, and allowing students to express themselves. The business manager got very nervous, and he said, "Well, we use off-white. That's the color we paint everything in the hallways, is off-white." I'm like, "Nah, we're not going to do that anymore. It's a coat of paint, right? It's not a big deal." When I started knocking down walls, then he got even more nervous. But ultimately, what it resulted in, interestingly, was we saw our vandalism go way down. Mm-hmm. So every year we would have this, it seemed, this significant incident of vandalism in our school district, right? And it went away. magically it went away when we turned over a lot of autonomy to the students about this is their space. And we also, we tried to build systems where we were finding ways to incorporate projects, as Jesse mentioned how important projects are, as a part of that, right? So we built these partnerships with the museums and art galleries around the city of Pittsburgh, and their projects were tied into using the folks that work in those places as inspiration and consultants. And the students then would dream up their own ideas, and we would curate these spaces within our school that became art projects for them. And it was wonderful. We have one hallway that's in our high school. And honestly, it's inspired by the Warhol Museum, Andy Warhol's work. And it looks like the hallway actually literally looks like the Partridge Family bus. So if you're old enough to remember what the Partridge Family bus looks like, a multitude of different colors and different geometric shapes all the way down the hallway, all done by the students. And the interesting thing about it, in all of these projects, not part of a class.
Yep.
No grade, right? Just the learning. The students were inspired to do these things because they were interested in them, right? So part of that shift has got to be about thinking about learning and why, learning for learning's sake and not learning for a grade's sake.
Yes.
So, all these pieces, I think they're only going to happen if we engage communities, because as Jesse said, we fall into this trap of even, I've always found it so interesting that, parents will remember their school experiences, and they oftentimes don't remember them fondly. But when you start talking about change in schools, they have a real hard time with that, right?
Well, that's because everybody
Everybody went to school
hard as they had it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember the conversations I used to have with parents around some of the changes we were moving towards with math instruction, right? And parents would get upset, and they would come in and talk to me and say, like, well, this isn't the way I learned math, and so this can't be right because it's not the way I learned math. And so then we would get engaged in this deeper conversation about their math experience in school, and they hated it. They would say, I really struggled in math. I didn't understand it. But yet they were questioning the way we were teaching math because it was different from the way they learned it. And I'm like, don't you understand the disconnect here, that if you didn't learn it really well, we were not doing a great job with math instruction in the way we did it then. We've learned a lot about how students learn, right? The brain research that informs practice now is significant. And so, pedagogically, we can make those changes, and it's based on something. It's not based on a whim or what someone thinks, right? It's really based on research and what we know how children learn best. And as Jesse mentioned, a lot of that really revolves around differentiation, which is understanding that children all learn differently.
That's right.
And that we can personalize their learning. We now have the tools to personalize their learning and meet their needs. So, I think those things kind of go hand in hand with safety and security. If you create an environment that's engaging for students, they're going to come to school. If they're engaged in learning, they're going to be spending less time being disruptive, right? And so all those things kind of add together to create an environment that's better. And the architectural design, I think, is a big piece of that too.
Yeah, that is so true. Bill Strickland from Manchester Craftsmen's Guild, he says it all the time, and he's absolutely right. You build these beautiful places, and the participants have a different level of pride, not only for the place, but for themselves too, because this is a beautiful environment and I am worth that. And we don't send that message very often, especially to our school systems that are very inequitable, So let's just bring this fun question up. How do we pay for this? Because you're absolutely right. This is the kind of innovative thinking we need. These are the kinds of things we need to do, and how we need to involve students and families into the process. But the problem is, we've got how many of these old, dinosaur buildings that we're keeping open all across this county and city, how do we ever begin to have the funds we need to really change the system?
Well, so that's a
That's
great
the
question.
trick question.
Well, I think there's a lot of depth to that. And some of it revolves around the things that we need to stop doing, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things that we fall prey to is we never get rid of stuff. We continue to do things, and a lot of those things are expensive. They cost us a lot of money. If we think deeply about that and think about what we no longer really need to do. And one example I'll give for that really is the amount of funding that we put towards outsourcing the standardized testing that we engage in Pennsylvania and really all over the United States. That standardized testing really, in my mind, I'm an advocate for gathering data that can inform us and inform what we need to do. But I, have seen over the bulk of my career, the pendulum swing really far one way for standardized testing that, it led to the limiting of curricula, limiting of the arts. And not really resulting in anything positive that I saw that benefited children in their learning. There's millions of dollars that's put forth every year to standardized testing. And so I think we're moving slowly towards the pendulum swinging back in the other direction, but not fast enough for my thinking. And, as I guess I advanced further into my career, I became less patient. And, there's a sense of urgency that rose up in me. And, because every group of students that we're waiting for the change to happen, they don't, you only get one chance to go through school. And so when we lack the courage, I think, to make some of these decisions, and one of the things I've tried to explain to my students, or we've explored with my students at the University of Pittsburgh, we spend billions with a B on our prisons and our incarcerated individuals every year. And I think if we can do a much better job on the other end and engage our students in meaningful learning experiences where they feel a sense of belonging in their schools, we will limit that, right? The research tells us that. The Brookings research that I was engaged with, it tells us that when we're able to build rich, engaging, relationship-oriented partnerships in our schools, kids come to school, their attendance is better, they have higher achievement, and when they do that, they find their passion and their purpose for school and for life, right? So those are the really important pieces. So yeah, it may cost us a little more on the front end, but I think we'll make that money back if we start doing a better job and it improves society. We can't be so short-sighted. We're too short-sighted, and I think, traditionally we've been that. If you're, the hole was round, if you're square and if you don't fit in that hole, good luck. That was the way it was always done. And that can't be the way we continue.
It's so true. It's so true. I have a daughter that has epilepsy. She had brain surgery at 4. So she lost part of her right temporal lobe and part of her amygdala. She's 13 now. But I remember 3rd grade hearing in it, if I had one more teacher or principal tell me, you read by 3rd grade so you can read to learn. You have to learn. Yep. And I was like, so what am I supposed to do? Tell her, good run, kid. You couldn't read by 3rd grade. We're chucking you in the river. Was that it? But that was literally, those enforced boxes, self-enforced boxes.
Sorting mechanisms, schools have fallen prey to that for a long, long time, is utilizing sorting mechanisms. The topic actually in my class yesterday was standardized testing, and I was giving my students a historical view of that. And the original multiple choice tests were developed for the military at World War I and used to sort recruits so they could put them in different jobs in the military. And they found out it didn't work. And then the next thing they did was they sold it to the education industry. And the education industry adopted it and has used it ever since.
It's not
Everything
put
from
it
IQ
down.
tests to standardized tests that we use today. And again, it still
I'll
doesn't
piggyback
work.
on that for 1 second. One quick story that echoes exactly what Dr. Ralston is saying. I was at a conference a while back, and Jamie Caspis, I don't know if you know him, he's I think the CEO or the department head of Google's education department. And he was engaged in a conversation with a group of educators. And he looked at us and he said, I can't get it from you guys. If I walked into my CEO and founder's office and said, look, guys, you don't have to do anything else. I've got the whole year's budget done. I've got our everything planned out, ready to go. I've done it all myself. He said, I'll probably be fired. He said, everything we do at Google and other organizations like ours is all group oriented, hands-on types of collaborations between groups to get the business plan, to formulate that base that you're going to start with and expand upon. He said, you have to have conversations with everybody, and input has to be put into that system in order to get the product that you want. He says, you guys give tests at schools, what good does that do? He says, you should have groups of students completing projects and then explaining what they did to recognize learning, not giving them a standardized test in order to mark a B, C, D, as Dr. Ralston is saying. You need hands-on types of activities. And believe me, he said, from my experience in what I do at Google, he said, I can tell you that a student's learned something or not by the demonstration or the presentation that they give at the end of the project. It's very simple to see. It's not that hard. It's probably a lot more fun and easier to grade. So I'll bow out with that. I just want to throw in my 2 cents worth because Dr. Ralston hit the nail on the head there, as usual.
Thank you, Jesse. That I couldn't have said that better. That honestly is so true. That and we continue to utilize that method in schools without really, and I think it's, honestly, I look at the depth of that. I think, as we talked in my class yesterday, politicians like to have a number, right? They like to publish that number, like to put it in the newspaper. And it really works to the detriment of a lot of our communities that have challenges, right? Because, if you think about how hard some of these communities are working to make themselves viable places for folks to relocate and to move into, and one of the first things that a parent does is when they're considering the place they may move is they're going to look at the schools. Right. And so if the only thing that they're seeing about that school is their test score, then it's one more nail that one more obstacle that school community has to endure. And we really have to start changing that mindset and the way we're celebrating the things that are truly happening in all of our schools.
So as we wrap up here, Dr. Ralston, I'm wondering what is or can you give your recommendation, if you will? What do you tell other superintendents in the forum about community partnerships and why they should participate in those kinds of things? Because I know sometimes they're not, it's scary, right? Opening up the doors to the community because you already get so much scrutiny. The last thing you need is somebody, looking under your rugs and behind your drapes. I get it. But what do you tell them to allay that fear and to get them to do it?
Yeah, I've always been an advocate for starting small, right? Start with one step. And that one step typically will be a positive step. But even if it's not, right? Even if it doesn't go quite the way you planned it to go, that's okay, right? That's okay. There's going to be things that you're going to learn from. We encouraged our teachers to think that way when they did their projects in their classrooms, right? We would say, try a project, and sometimes they didn't go quite the way they wanted them to, and they wanted to retreat back to, well, I'll just go back to the way I did things. That project didn't work. Okay, well, let's talk about why the project didn't work before you abandon it, right? And think about what you did learn from it. And so I would encourage people to do that as well with their opportunities to engage with their communities out there. we had at Avonworth, I had the opportunity to participate in several strategic plans with our community. And we built these really robust teams of sometimes 30 to 50 people, and would try to find representation from every part of our community to sit on that committee. And we really looked at it as an opportunity to grow together. And a lot of it was especially the first few times we met were about people just getting to know each other, right? A group of people that I really enjoyed engaging with were our retirees. Our retirees had so much to offer our students. That generational relationship was just wonderful. And a lot of times folks, they don't recognize that. But folks that are retired often have more time, right? They have a level of expertise with certain things that a lot of us today don't have, right? There are certain lost vocations and arts that have been innovated out, right? And so they have, wonderful skills and hobbies and things that they can share. So, but that opportunity to build strategically and grow strategically is a wonderful thing for a school community. And when you involve everybody, you can sit back and identify what's our purpose, right? What do we want to do? And where should we be putting our emphasis and resources? And that allows you to be more efficient and more effective when you set goals and think strategically. We had, one of the first strategic plans we did at Avonworth was one about 10 years ago I was involved with. And at the time, our music program was not good. It was not good. And it was almost a source of embarrassment for the school community. And so it was identified strategically in that setting, that strategic planning group. We identified music as somewhere we really wanted to get better. And so we were able to focus our efforts strategically, allocating funding for that, and also thinking about the actions that we need to put in place. And here we are a decade later, and we have one of the best music programs around. And it didn't happen by accident. Like hope, I always say this I think this is a great thing for people to consider. Hope is not a strategy. Yeah. It's really not. Hope is hope. We always want hope, right? But it's not always going to result in something happening. You have to think about taking the steps to make that happen. And that's what would be my encouragement to folks. It's thinking small, but engaging their community, being vulnerable, right? Taking the steps to be vulnerable and taking small steps to get where you want to be.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. And Jesse, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your input. And, I really liked learning about what's going on down in your neck of the woods. Is there anything else we want to make sure?
I'll just mention, Bridget, if you don't mind, Jesse is a member of the forum.
Oh, great.
And he's one of the valued members of the forum, and certainly adds a lot of value to our meetings and the initiatives that we undertake. So I really appreciate Jesse joining us today and adding value to our conversation as well.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you guys for even taking the initiative to do something like this. We all have one common thread that probably is embedded amongst all of us. Somewhere down the line, I don't know when it was, could have been when you were in elementary school, middle school, high school, junior high. There was an educator that made a difference in our life. Mm-hmm. Outside of my immediate family, educators were the ones that put me on the path of where I need to go. And believe me, I was no bowl of cherries. And
I don't think any of us were really.
It's a great feeling, and part of my commitment to what I want to do as my career is exactly what I'm doing. And it's helping kids, and they all need help. I don't care where they come from. They can be the most wealthiest families in your district. They can be the most needy families in your district. They all need help, and they all need guidance. And that's what we're all here for. And if it wasn't for us trying to make a difference in a student's life, then none of us would be here. So I commend all of you, and that's what this whole thing's all about. And we can get it done. I'm very confident in it. But thank you for having me, and thank you for the initiative.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you, Jesse.